Harvey Miguel Robinson, 30 years, 105 days. The first person who has been waiting on death row for more than 30 years is Harvey Miguel Robinson. Robinson committed a grievous act by raping and murdering 47-year-old Jessica Jean Fortney, a crime that shocked the community and led to his conviction on 3 separate murder charges. Initially sentenced to death for all 3 counts, subsequent legal proceedings resulted in the death sentences for the first 2 murders being converted to life sentences, leaving the charge in the Fortney case as the sole capital offense. As a consequence, Robinson has spent over 30 years and 105 days on death row, a prolonged period that reflects the complex interplay between legal appeals, evolving judicial standards, and the enduring debates surrounding capital punishment in America. Willie Jerome Manning, 30 years and 126 days. The next individual whose case has kept him on death row for over 30 years is Willie Jerome Manning. On November 20th, 1994, at 11:30 p.m., Manning committed a harrowing double murder by taking the lives of 19-year-old John Steckler and 22-year-old Tiffany Miller. Initially, Manning was sentenced to death for 2 separate double murder convictions, each carrying the weight of capital punishment due to the severity and brutality of the crimes. However, as his case progressed through the legal system, one of these convictions was overturned, following appeals and re-examinations of the evidence and legal procedures. Despite this development, Manning remains on death row solely for the remaining conviction. To date, he has spent a full 30 years and 126 days awaiting the final resolution of his case, a duration that underscores the protracted legal processes inherent in capital punishment cases and the ongoing debates regarding the balance between public safety, judicial accuracy, and the ethical implications of long-term death row confinement. Larry Roy, 30 years, 196 days on death row. Larry Roy, infamously dubbed the Cheneyville Slasher by the media, has been on death row for a full 30 years and 196 days following a violent series of attacks in 1993 in Cheneyville, Louisiana. On that fateful day, Roy slashed 5 individuals in a rampage. The attack was driven by a personal vendetta. Roy targeted Richard's ex-wife, his former girlfriend, after she ended their relationship, resulting in a brutal outburst of anger and violence. The incident shocked the community with its ferocity and the calculated nature of the attack, drawing widespread media attention. Robin Lee Rowe, 31 years, 103 days on death row. Robin Lee Rowe has spent 31 years and 103 days on death row after being convicted for the murder by arson of her husband and their 2 children in February 1992. In a devastating act of arson, Rowe deliberately set a fire that consumed her family home, resulting in the tragic deaths of her immediate family members. The case is particularly notable as Rowe is the only woman on Idaho's death row, housed at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center. The horrific nature of the crime, an act that involved the deliberate endangerment and ultimate loss of life of her loved ones, shocked the community and led to a rigorous legal investigation. The detailed proceedings of the case illuminated the complexities of familial relationships turned violent and left an indelible mark on public consciousness. Cleophas Prince, Jr., 31 years, 129 days on death row. Cleophas Prince, Jr. has been confined to death row for 31 years and 129 days following a series of heinous crimes that spanned several neighborhoods. His criminal history is marked by multiple burglaries that escalated into violent encounters, culminating in the murder of 6 women, a spree that sent shockwaves through the community. Among these brutal crimes, Prince also raped one of his victims, further compounding the horror of his actions. His methodical approach to targeting vulnerable individuals, combined with the violent nature of his offenses, triggered extensive investigations and a high-profile legal process. The severity and multiplicity of his crimes have ensured that his case remains one of the most disturbing in recent history. Charles Stevens, 31 years, 227 days on death row. Charles Stevens is currently on death row, having served 31 years and 227 days since his conviction for a series of violent crimes committed in 1989 on Interstate 580. In this particularly brutal case, Stevens was responsible for the murder of 4 individuals during a series of attacks that shocked the public and law enforcement alike. His criminal activities were not isolated. He operated alongside an accomplice, Richard James Clark, with whom he collaborated on some of the fatal attacks. The systematic nature of the assaults, combined with the targeting of multiple victims in a public setting, underscored the severity of Stevens' actions and the widespread impact on the community. During the trial, investigators and legal experts presented extensive evidence linking Stevens to the murders, leading to his death sentence. James Aaron McKinney, 31 years, 234 days on death row. James Aaron McKinney has been on death row for 31 years and 234 days after being convicted of 2 separate murders committed during burglaries. In one incident, McKinney was found responsible for the murder of 40-year-old Christine Mertens, while in a different burglary he fatally shot 65-year-old James McLean. The crimes were marked by a rapid escalation from property offenses to lethal violence, a progression that shocked the community and law enforcement alike. Investigators meticulously pieced together evidence linking McKinney to both murders, establishing a pattern of criminal behavior that culminated in tragic loss of life. The legal proceedings focused on the deliberate and calculated nature of these acts, and the resulting convictions underscored the severity of his crimes. Raymond A. Twyford III, 31 years, 336 days on death row. Raymond A. Twyford III is serving 31 years and 336 days on death row following the murder of 37-year-old Richard Franks. Twyford's crime was driven by personal motives. He believed that Franks had raped his girlfriend's daughter, an allegation that led him to commit a premeditated act of violence. The incident occurred after Twyford harbored deep suspicions about Franks, and the investigation subsequently confirmed his involvement in the killing. The case details reveal a calculated approach that escalated from personal grievance to homicide, resulting in a high-profile trial that scrutinized every aspect of the incident. The evidence presented during the trial painted a clear picture of the events leading up to the murder, as well as the chilling nature of Twyford's actions. Joseph Danks, 31 years, 346 days on death row. Joseph Danks has spent 31 years and 346 days on death row after a series of violent crimes that spanned several years. In 1990, while incarcerated, Danks strangled his 67-year-old cellmate to death during a violent altercation, an act that shocked fellow inmates and prison staff. This murder was not isolated. Prior to this incident, Danks was serving a life sentence for the murders of 6 transients in Koreatown, Los Angeles, committed in January 1987. The investigations into his criminal activities revealed a disturbing pattern of extreme violence and a blatant disregard for human life. Each incident was carefully documented by law enforcement, and the accumulated evidence established Danks as a perpetrator of multiple heinous crimes. Eric Darnell Holmes, 31 years, 353 days on death row. Eric Darnell Holmes is currently on death row, having served 31 years and 353 days since his conviction for a violent series of attacks that unfolded on the day he was terminated from his job at Shoney's restaurant. After a heated dispute with co-worker Amy Foshi, Holmes was fired, and later that night, he and his accomplice Michael Vance carried out a brutal assault on Foshi and 2 restaurant managers. As they exited the building at closing time, Holmes and Vance attacked, stabbing multiple individuals. The assault resulted in the deaths of 20-year-old Teresa Blossel, while Foshi survived the attack. Ralph Bays, 31 years, 38 days on death row. Ralph Bays has been on death row for 31 years and 38 days following a violent incident in which he shot 2 police officers at his home. The case took on additional complexity when Bays challenged the method of execution prescribed by Kentucky law. arguing that the lethal injection cocktail constituted cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the Eighth Amendment. Bays initiated legal action against the Kentucky State Department of Corrections. This challenge, which aimed to alter the state's execution protocols, eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In a significant ruling, the court rejected his claim by a vote of 7-2, thereby upholding the constitutionality of the prescribed method. Eugene Broxton, 32 years, 177 days on death row. Eugene Broxton has been on death row for 32 years and 177 days after his conviction for the shooting that occurred during a robbery at a motel in Channelview. In this particularly violent incident, Broxton targeted newlyweds Waylon and Sheila Dawkins. The crime took place in a setting where the victims should have felt secure, compounding the tragedy of the event. Detailed investigations revealed substantial evidence linking Broxton to the crime, and his actions were characterized by a level of brutality that left an indelible mark on the community. Additionally, Broxton is considered the prime suspect in a series of robbery murders that took place in Houston between March and May 1991, though he has never been formally charged for these additional crimes. Frank A. Walls, 32 years, 228 days on death row. Frank A. Walls has been on death row for 32 years and 228 days after being convicted for the robbery and murder of 5 individuals in Ocean City, crimes that unfolded between 1985 and 1980-1987. Walls' case is marked by its complexity and the evolution of the legal proceedings over time. In 1994, he was granted a new trial, a decision that momentarily delayed the final resolution of his case. However, after a subsequent trial where evidence was re-examined, Walls was again found guilty and subsequently resentenced to death. The case involved extensive investigations that uncovered a series of violent robberies culminating in lethal outcomes, which deeply affected the local community. The detailed evidence presented during his trials, including eyewitness testimonies and forensic findings, painted a comprehensive picture of his involvement in these tragic events. Rosie Alfaro, 32 years, 243 days on death row. Rosie Alfaro has been on death row for 32 years and 243 days after being convicted for the murder of 9-year-old Autumn Wallace. This case is particularly notable as Alfaro became the first woman in Orange County, California, to be sentenced to death by gas chamber, a decision that marked a controversial moment in the county's legal history. The investigation into the murder of Autumn Wallace involved careful forensic analysis and the gathering of key witness testimonies, which collectively established a strong case linking Alfaro to the crime. The tragic loss of a young life and the disturbing nature of the case left an enduring impact on the community. Throughout the trial, the severity of the offense was underscored by the vulnerability of the victim and the calculated manner in which the crime was executed. Michael McGay Reeves, 32 years, 304 days on death row. Michael McGay Reeves has been on death row for 32 years and 304 days, following his conviction for the murder of 27-year-old Susan Toller during a home invasion in 1989. Reeves, who already had a prior conviction for rape, escalated his criminal behavior when he invaded a residence and brutally murdered Toller, an act that shocked the community. The case was characterized by a thorough investigation that gathered substantial evidence linking Reeves to the home invasion and subsequent killing. In addition to this crime, Reeves is suspected of involvement in 2 similar murders in Virginia, as well as multiple sexual assaults spanning North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee, although he has not been charged in connection with these additional crimes. Trial detailed the sequence of events that led to Toller's tragic death, with forensic evidence and eyewitness accounts playing critical roles. Timothy Allen Dunlap, 32 years, 328 days on death row. Timothy Allen Dunlap has been on death row for 32 years and 328 days following a series of violent crimes that resulted in multiple convictions. On October 16th, 1991, Dunlap fatally shot a bank teller during a robbery at a Soda Springs bank, a crime that shocked the local community with its sudden brutality. In addition to this heinous act, he was also sentenced in Ohio for the murder of his girlfriend. The evidence presented at trial underscored the premeditated nature of the attack, while the subsequent conviction for his girlfriend's murder further cemented his status as a dangerous offender. William J. Golahan, 32 years, 363 days on death row. William J. Golahan has spent 32 years and 363 days on death row, following a particularly violent act committed during a riot in 1991. Amid the chaos of the riot, Golahan brutally murdered fellow inmate Gerald Pileggi by bludgeoning him, an act that not only deepened the disorder of the situation but also added a new layer of severity to his criminal record. At the time of this violent outburst, Golahan was already serving a 130-year sentence for the murder of a woman, highlighting a long-standing pattern of extreme violence in his criminal history. The evidence gathered during the investigation into the riot clearly demonstrated that his actions were both deliberate and vicious. The circumstances surrounding the inmate murder during a period of unrest further emphasized the dangerous nature of his behavior. David Leonard Wood, 32 years, 59 days on death row. David Leonard Wood has been confined to death row for 32 years and 59 days after being convicted of a series of brutal crimes in El Paso. Between May and August 1987, Wood committed a series of rapes and murders against 6 women, with the victims' bodies later discovered buried in the desert, a discovery that sent shockwaves through the community. The gruesome nature of these crimes prompted an intensive investigation. Beyond these confirmed acts, Wood is also considered a prime suspect in the disappearances of 3 additional young girls and women, although no formal charges have been brought against him in those cases. Throughout the legal proceedings, Wood has repeatedly denied responsibility and attempted to have his sentence overturned. Yet, these efforts have been unsuccessful. Robert Lee Walden, 32 years, 95 days on death row. Robert Lee Walden has been on death row for 32 years and 95 days following a series of violent crimes committed in the Tucson area. On June 13, 1991, Walden fatally raped and murdered 31-year-old Miguela Burhans in her Tucson apartment, a crime that sent ripples of shock and grief through the community. In addition to this capital offense, he is serving 5 life terms for another murder and 4 rapes, all committed between 1989 and 1991. Investigators also linked him to a 3rd murder, though he has never been formally charged in connection with that incident. Von Lester Taylor, 33 years, 294 days on death row. Taylor was convicted for a series of violent crimes that have left a lasting mark on the affected community. On the day of the incident, Taylor murdered 49-year-old Kay Tide and her mother, 76-year-old Beth Potts, near Beaver Springs in Summit County. In a further escalation of his criminal actions, Taylor and his co-defendant, Edward Deli, later kidnapped the 2 daughters of the victims. While Deli was sentenced to life in prison, Taylor received a death sentence, and he has since selected lethal injection as his preferred method of execution. Roger Mark Scott, 33 years, 326 days on death row. Roger Mark Scott is on death row for his role in the tragic shooting death of 4-year-old Christopher Mauck. The incident, which sent shockwaves through the community, involved Scott in a case that also included co-defendants James Lynn Stiers and the boy's mother Deborah Malka, both of whom were also sentenced to death. The fatal shooting of the young child during a violent episode resulted in a high-profile trial where evidence was rigorously presented and examined. Despite the severity of the charges and the death sentences imposed, one of the related convictions was later overturned in 2015. This overturning added complexity to the legal narrative of the case, although Scott's own conviction has remained intact. Henry Eugene Hodges, 33 years, 43 days on death row. Eugene Hodges is serving 33 years and 43 days on death row following his conviction for the murder of 37-year-old Ronald Bassett during a robbery in 1990. In addition to this crime, Hodges was found guilty of killing 2 more individuals in separate incidents that took place in Tennessee and Georgia, resulting in him receiving 2 additional life sentences. Hodges later confessed to the strangulation and murder of several homosexual men during a particularly brutal period between 1988 and 1990, claiming responsibility for at least 8 homicides. His confessions have made him a suspect in several other cases, although formal charges were never brought forward for those additional murders. Richard Farley, 33 years, 56 days on death row. Richard Farley has been on death row for 33 years and 56 days after being convicted for a violent rampage that resulted in the deaths of 7 people and left 4 others wounded. During the course of his attack, Farley specifically targeted individuals with a level of brutality that shocked the community. Among the victims was Laura Black, a former co-worker whom Farley had stalked for 4 years prior to his violent outburst. Although she was shot and rendered unconscious during the attack, Black managed to survive the ordeal. The extensive investigations into Farley's actions uncovered a disturbing sequence of events, with forensic evidence and eyewitness testimonies painting a clear picture of a calculated and relentless assault. Billy Ray Walden, 33 years, 7 days on death row. Billy Ray Walden's case is marked by a series of violent crimes that spanned multiple incidents, each leaving a trail of devastation. During a robbery, Walden murdered 42-year-old Dawn Ellerman and her 13-year-old daughter and set the victim's home on fire. 2 weeks later, he committed another violent act by shooting 59-year-old who was working on a car at the time. These actions were part of a broader pattern of violent behavior that culminated in his conviction and placement on death row. In addition to his criminal activities, Walden is noted for being the creator of the constructed language Polyespo. In significant legal development in 2023, his convictions were overturned by the California Supreme Court on the grounds that he was denied representation by competent counsel during his trial. Jarvis J. Masters, 34 years, 227 days on death row. Jarvis J. Masters has been on death row for 34 years and 227 days following his conviction for his involvement in the murder of Howell Birchfield in 1985. Initially serving time for an armed robbery, Masters' criminal activities escalated significantly when he became implicated in the murder of a law enforcement officer. Investigators determined that Masters was responsible for fashioning the weapon later used by another inmate, Andre Johnson, in the fatal shooting of Sergeant Birchfield. The detailed investigation unearthed a sequence of events that linked Masters' actions directly to the deadly outcome. The trial meticulously reviewed forensic evidence and eyewitness accounts, ultimately leading to a conviction that underscored his pivotal role in the incident. Oscar Franklin Smith, 34 years, 231 days on death row. Oscar Franklin Smith has been on death row for 34 years and 231 days after being convicted of killing his estranged wife, Judy Robert Smith, along with her 2 sons, Chad and Jason Burnett. His case is distinguished not only by the tragic nature of the crime, but also by its complex legal history. Originally, Smith was scheduled to be executed on April 21, 2022. His execution was reprieved by Governor Bill Lee due to an oversight in the preparation for the lethal injection protocol. This reprieve underscored the critical importance of adherence to proper procedures in capital punishment cases. Notably, Smith is the oldest death row inmate in Tennessee, a fact that has drawn significant public attention. As a result of the legal review, a new execution date has been set for May 22, 2025. Stephen David Catlin, 34 years, 247 days. Stephen David Catlin has been on death row for 34 years and 247 days following his conviction for poisoning 2 of his wives and his adoptive mother. Catlin's case is a disturbing example of domestic violence that escalated into calculated murder. Investigation into his crimes revealed that he deliberately administered toxic substances, a method that underlined both premeditation and the extreme breach of trust inherent in familial relationships. The trial presented a wealth of forensic evidence and expert testimony that detailed how Catlin's actions resulted in the untimely deaths of his victims. The nature of the poisonings, executed in a systematic manner, highlighted the chilling determination behind his actions. The resulting courtroom proceedings meticulously examined every facet of the case. Nathaniel Code, 34 years, 48 days on death row. Nathaniel Code has been on death row for 34 years and 48 days following his conviction for the mass murder of 4 individuals. His case is characterized by the extraordinary scale and brutality of his crimes. Investigators established that, in addition to the mass murder for which he was convicted, Code was responsible for at least 4 other murders, with some authorities suspecting that the total number of his victims could be as high as 12. The investigation was extensive, involving forensic evidence, eyewitness testimonies, and meticulous scene reconstructions, all of which painted a harrowing picture of a spree of violence that left multiple communities devastated. The legal proceedings scrutinized the sequence of events and the methods used during these attacks, confirming Code's pattern of indiscriminate violence. Blanche Taylor Moore, 34 years, 55 days on death row. Blanche Taylor Moore's case is one marked by the chilling use of poison as a weapon against those close to her. Moore was convicted for poisoning her boyfriend, a method that left authorities with clear forensic evidence of toxic substances. The investigation later revealed further suspicions, linking her to the untimely deaths of her father, her mother-in-law, and her first husband. Each of these cases was scrutinized for evidence of deliberate poisoning, and while the charges varied, the pattern of using arsenic as a means of murder was unmistakable. Her case not only highlighted the dangers posed by someone who could manipulate such a deadly substance, but also underscored the betrayal of familial trust. George Treppel, 34 years, 8 days on death row. George Treppel's criminal case centers on the calculated use of poison to commit murder. Treppel was convicted for the deliberate poisoning and subsequent murder of his neighbor, 41-year-old Peggy Carr. The method of poisoning, often a subtle but deadly approach, left behind forensic evidence that played a critical role in the investigation. The case unfolded with investigators carefully tracing the source of the toxin and establishing Treppel's access to it, as well as his proximity to the victim prior to her untimely death. The trial featured detailed forensic analysis, including toxicology reports, which conclusively linked Treppel to the fatal exposure of the poison. The community was left reeling as the case revealed the quiet and insidious nature of his crime, one that lacked the overt violence seen in other homicides but was equally, if not more, devastating. Ramon Salcido, 34 years, 87 days on death row. Ramon Salcido's case is one of overwhelming familial and personal violence, resulting in a staggering loss of life. Salcido was convicted for the murder of multiple family members and others. He killed his wife, 2 of his 3 daughters, his mother-in-law. The breadth of his crimes shocked both the local community and legal authorities, as the killings spanned various relationships and settings, revealing a deeply disturbed pattern of behavior. Investigators pieced together a sequence of events that pointed to a premeditated and systematic approach to murder. Testimonies and forensic evidence from each crime scene provided a detailed account of the brutality involved. Randy Kraft, 35 years, 105 days. Randy Kraft's case is among the most notorious in the annals of violent crime, characterized by a long series of brutal acts. Over a period spanning from 1972 to 1983, Kraft raped, tortured, mutilated, and murdered at least 16 young men, with the majority of these heinous crimes occurring in California. His methods were both calculated and horrifying, involving not only the taking of life but also extreme physical abuse that left lasting scars on the memories of survivors and the families of the victims. Investigators later suspected that his criminal activities extended even further, with allegations that he may have been responsible for raping and murdering up to 51 additional boys and young men. The extensive investigation, which relied on forensic evidence, victim testimonies, and meticulous reconstruction of his actions, painted a picture of a methodical predator whose actions spanned over a decade.